Good morning and welcome to the ETSI virtual event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. I'm Guy Daniels, and in this session we'll be looking at how to leverage research and innovation in security standards using the example of the Inspire 5G Plus project. And to explain more, I am joined by Alex Leadbeater, who is Chairman of the ETSI NFV SEC and also Head of Global Obligations, Futures and Standards at BT, and Chrystel Gaber, who is Research and Project Coordinator with Inspire 5G Plus and also a Research Engineer with Orange. Welcome both of you. Thanks very much for taking part in the event today. Chrystel, if you would like to start the presentation, and then we'll hear from Alex and follow up with a discussion between the three of us. So Chrystel, over to you.
Thank you, Guy. So I'll present, first of all, I will present the project Inspire 5G Plus in a few words. So the project Inspire 5G Plus is an European project in 2020. It involves 14 partners throughout Europe, and our aim is to propose a fully automated management system which is able to reason with trustworthiness and liability for a multi-party and multi-domain infrastructure. Our research topics are related to, for example, how can we assess the trustworthiness of components? What is the relationship between trust and liability? Or how can we deal with these two concepts in security management? And also, how can we appreciate the liability of stakeholders in such a complex and heterogeneous infrastructure that is 5G? And the first thing that we did was to identify in which standard our results would be best suited. So we identified the standard ETSI NFVSec 24, which is related to network function virtualization and proposes a comprehensive security framework for security management of NFVs. And here is a schema from this specification. After our first year, we identified what are the results and what are the potential synergies that we can have with this standardization group. And we redacted a small document that we provided to this group to have some initial discussion with them. So first of all, what we did is identify and define the concepts with which we are working, and also agree that on an architecture that we want to use. What we saw is that the ETSI ZSM architecture was very adapted to what we wanted to do, because we saw that for liability there are some hierarchical relationship between actors, and this architecture allows to easily put in place some cross and intra-domain communication and have a recursive architecture. And then we also identify the potential contributions that we will have in this standard. We also proposed to this group to have an iterative approach to move forward together. As we started, we wanted to share our early outcomes and some topics of interest to check with them if it's aligned with what they want to do and their direction. And we collected the group's feedback. And then our plan is actually to focus our research on the items that are identified as common interest, then to propose contributions and also to illustrate our contributions with proof of concept. So this will allow to show either that this technology is ready to be deployed in the systems, or just to showcase what is possible and how research should move forward. And now I will let Alex continue.
Okay, thank you, Chrystel. So, as Chrystel says, the standards are, certainly from my perspective as chair of both NFVSec and also the wider TC Cyber activities within ETSI, achieve their best when we're able to include input from all stakeholders. Now, what we find traditionally is that standards being contribution driven tends to lack input from research. And as Chrystel has sort of outlined in her earlier slides, that leads to some interesting gaps and challenges which the 5G Inspire project is hopefully going to fill. Now, obviously, this is early days, but certainly I find as chair these sorts of opportunities to bring together operators, manufacturers, regulators, academia, plus also the user community ultimately who benefit from 5G, and actually leverage the best. That said, the challenge as always, and as Chrystel said, is trying to find specific gaps that we can use to leverage research. So obviously 5G Inspire has managed to land into SEC24, and rather conveniently for me, I'm also the lead for that document. However, the thing we do have to obviously be cognizant of is there is always a trade-off between proven technology, which traditionally the telecoms market has always followed, and cutting-edge research. So projects like 5G Inspire give us the opportunity to make the best use of innovative technology. But what we have to remember is that given the investment and the cost to the industry of launching 5G, it has to be ready for service. An iterative approach is good, but what you can't afford to do is have early versions that don't quite hit the mark in terms of what they need to do, either technologically or from a security perspective. So I'm going to look forward to working with Chrystel and also the wider project to try and leverage that in. What I think they have achieved, which is great for ETSI and great for the project, is actually identifying a real gap which industry hadn't otherwise filled. So in the case of SEC24 and the 5G Inspire project for ETSI, there are significant gaps in the attestation, for example, where although 5G talks about service-based architectures and bringing network functions into service, the actual framework required to then tie that down in a secure way, but also for smaller MVNOs and similar small virtual operators, do that in a multi-cloud environment where it's not just all owned by a single tier one operator, is actually currently very, very difficult to do. So really, really exciting project, and certainly as chair of NFV-SEC, I look forward to that. However, what we also have to be clear, as I said, in terms of the sort of provenness of technology, is what we will be looking to see as the industry is effectively the analysts or the analytics and the background information that went with these exciting techniques. Can we bring them in? Can they be proved for use? So I look forward, as I say, it's great to be able to talk on this panel or this session today, and also to be able to talk to all of you and say, if you think any of this is exciting, or indeed if researchers are listening to this and thinking, actually, we've got more ideas, I'd love to see those as well in not just NFV-SEC, but in wider ETSI. So I think that takes us through the formal slides. Now we get to the more exciting bit, which I always enjoy, which is the sort of more panel chat and a few questions, hopefully.
Yes, thank you, Alex and Chrystel. Very interesting presentation indeed. Alex, how successful has the NFV ISG been in harnessing research work, and how has the group benefited?
So what I would say is traditionally NFV-SEC hasn't traditionally, which is why I think this particular project is a really exciting thing to be involved in. The wider NFV ISG itself, so security is a sub part of a wider NFV focus. ETSI is leading the world in network function virtualization. It is the home of it, really. So at the higher level, ETSI's done really well. So we have things like the open source Mano projects, we have ZSM, which Chrystel mentioned, and we also have the STFs, which are very much more research led. So the wider architecture within NFV has made great use of research. NFV-SEC has hitherto less so, and the reason is that a lot of the security capabilities we need and those gaps actually was still in the research stage. So when people talk about using AI to sort of do secure intelligence and automatic threat detection, a lot of that really is cutting edge research. So it's not that we've sort of failed to engage, it's the fact that NFV is sufficiently far ahead of the curve. What we're now seeing is that first stage research starting to become available. So if we were to talk again in another 12 months, I think I'll probably be able to say, actually, we've leveraged quite a lot. So we're right at the start of that journey. And I really look forward to taking the rest of it.
Well, let's hope we can indeed talk again in a year's time and see what the situation is then. Chrystel, why should researchers be aware of standards activity? Why should they consider factoring this into their work at an early stage? What is the benefit to them?
Well, the first benefit is to actually raise awareness of industrial partners about the works that are being done by the scientific community. And the second advantage is also to be able to take into account the feedback of the industry during a project's life. So like this, we are able to make sure that what we are working on is aligned to the industry concerns and are actually solving some problems that uh, that the industry is facing.
Now, Alex, the benefits here are very clear, but what are the challenges of leveraging research project results when undertaking standards work, especially with the NFV SEC? And as you said, this is something that's pretty new to the group.
Okay. I mean, obviously, with any system where we're going to be protecting personal data and other critical national infrastructure, security is one of those things that you can't really not get right at day one. It has to be in version 1.0. It cannot be a retrofit. So the real challenge here is leveraging essentially cutting edge research in a way that we know it's going to work, we know it's going to add value to the security journey, and it's also tried and tested. So there are traditional solutions out there, and I think, as Chrystel said, what the project has been able to do is identify a number of gaps where we just haven't, using existing capabilities and technologies, been able to secure the whole system end to end, perhaps as well as we might like. That said, a lot of those sorts of technologies and capabilities, traditional firewall approaches and traditional threat detection, intrusion detection, and similar, and older forms of attestation are reliable. They've been out in the field. We understand their weaknesses. We understand their benefits. So the ability to bring in new is great, but that has to be traded off against a risk of, will it work in the field if we're replacing older generation techniques? Are they of a mature enough level, but also that the industry feels comfortable with them, that they're actually going to work, people are able to bring them in, and also that innovation has been deemed to be inclusive. So one of the things that ETSI is very strong on is obviously its IPR and free access to things. So as I said, I look forward to bringing this in. What we will obviously in NFV be looking to do is to say, well, okay, what's the background to this? Where's the benefit? Can we prove the value? Do we know it's going to work? But also, as they say, it's the reinventing the wheel for the sake of reinventing the wheel. What the research needs to be able to do, and I think in this case it does, is actually solve a real industry problem rather than just being yet another option in the overall standards in the world. As they say, the easiest way of reducing the number of standards is to create a standard for those standards. But I think in this case, they have found a real gap. Attestation and SEC 24 really is an issue for the industry. So I think in this case, really exciting, and I look forward to working through that iterative stage to develop those standards for the field.
And Chrystel, what lessons have you learned from the Inspire 5G Plus project in terms of your interaction with the standards bodies that could be useful for future research projects?
Yes, so actually, in this project, it's for me the first time that I use such a methodology. I've been in a couple of projects before, and what we usually did in those projects was to actually work on our research items, and then at the end of the project, during the last year, start identifying where should we push our results, and then do that. But the problem of this methodology is actually that we're collecting the feedback at the last minute. So either it means that our research was not fully aligned, and so we cannot, we have to modify some of the things that we have found if we wanted to make it acceptable. And this is not always possible at the end of the project. So it means that either we're not doing this work or we're doing it after the life of the project. And I think with the methodology that we adopted right now, this would allow to take into account this feedback during the life of the project at an early stage, and it's really easier to address these feedback early on. Now, I also think that this iterative approach is interesting. And also the fact to propose a proof of concept, because it can illustrate that either that the results are working and can be deployed, and this can reassure the industrial partners, or it can showcase how things can work, illustrate also what are the missing points, and discuss on future research, and probably also define further projects that would be able to address these issues that were found, or the new problems that the industry could comment on.
Thank you, Chrystel. And a very quick final question to Alex. One thing that's come across to me during this presentation is the need to identify these gaps. And it seems that it's so important to try and identify synergies between the researchers and standards bodies, and to help each other.
Yes, I think that's actually for me the biggest challenge. So within wider ETSI, we've been talking about how do we instill, call it knowledge of the existence of standards and the importance of security by design actually into the university, sort of both the research programs, but also the undergraduate and postgraduate programs. So playing out away from that, and if I think about what Chrystel's just said in answer to the previous question, the challenge here is moving from a state where researchers effectively either look across industry and look for problems to solve, or they start to work on something because it's sort of interesting from a research perspective, which is very often the case, and then they go looking for homes for it. I think the bridge step that's missing is tying those research areas into, and some of those researchers actually indirectly to the standards community, so that what they're doing is tailoring their research specifically to the gaps that industry has developed. Now, clearly, in the case of Inspire 5G, it has a number of industry partners in it who clearly are involved in the wider NFV and wider 5G activity. But certainly in terms of ISG, NFV SEC, or indeed, for example, TC Cyber or the wider AI security group, ISG SAI, what we haven't yet been able to do is to actually bring those communities in and work collaboratively. And these sorts of events are a good stepping stone to that, to actually develop a set of roadmaps of what do we think we need to fill those gaps, rather than effectively bringing things in that might be useful. Obviously, the other challenge, as Chrystel said, is that they're still looking at this as a multi-year program. If we look, for example, at SEC 24, there is an industry need now for that. So we expect that to be published in the next probably 3 to 9 months. COVID slowed it down a little bit from its original target. So what we'll be able to do is sort of leverage the initial findings, but some of the benefit that Chrystel's talked about, we may not be able to add till later on, because we'll have to go with other sort of approaches in the interim. So I think the challenge for both ETSI, the wider standards bodies in Europe, and indeed the research community as a whole, is how do we bring the effectively all stakeholders together on the initial part of the journey in terms of what are the gaps, what are we trying to achieve, so that the research is specifically targeted, and then they bring the results back, rather than the more limited benefit we get of cutting edge research and then trying to leverage it sort of into holes that may or may not exist.
Great, thank you, Alex, and also thank you, Chrystel, as well. Now, we have a full agenda of presentations and panel discussions and interviews across this 2-day event. Details and timings are on the website, and if you've missed anything, don't worry, it will all be available to watch later on demand. Plus, we'll be taking your questions during our second and final live Q&A session at the end of today, and you can submit those questions now. Please stay with us for our next session, which is a presentation on graph-structured data for real-world scenarios. Goodbye for now.